The morning fog hung heavy over sunny meadows as 3 pickup trucks bearing the logo of Harrington Hunting Club rolled slowly down Maple Avenue. Eleanor stood in her driveway, arms crossed, watching with grim satisfaction as the men unloaded equipment. "You understand the parameters?" she asked Raymond Harrington, a burly man with a weathered face. "The undeveloped wooded area behind the houses is where you'll set up. The HOA has full legal rights to the property." Raymond nodded. "Appreciate the opportunity, Ms. Pritchard. Finding good hunting grounds close to town isn't easy these days. Just remember, this arrangement is between us and the HOA board." Eleanor neglected to mention that the board in this instance meant herself and her 2 loyal supporters, with the other members deliberately kept in the dark. The community hasn't been officially notified yet to avoid unnecessary complications. What Eleanor didn't know was that Walter Jenkins, walking his usual morning route, had spotted the trucks and was now watching from behind a neighbor's hedge. As the hunters disappeared into the woods carrying rifles, Walter pulled out his phone. Within an hour, Melissa Carter was standing in Eleanor's living room, her face flushed with anger. "You invited hunters to discharge firearms less than 500 feet from residential properties. Have you completely lost your mind?" Eleanor remained seated, calmly sipping her tea. "The HOA owns that land, and hunting is a perfectly legal activity when properly licensed, which they are. There are children who play near those woods, and pets. Not to mention it's a clear violation of City Ordinance 352, which prohibits hunting within a quarter-mile of residential structures." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That ordinance applies to city land. Ours is privately owned by the HOA. In what universe does that make this okay?" Melissa's voice rose. "You did this because of our disagreement, didn't you? To intimidate me." "Not everything is about you, Miss Carter." Eleanor set down her teacup. "The hunting club pays a substantial fee for access. That money goes directly into the HOA budget, which means lower dues for everyone." The truth was more complicated. Eleanor had indeed orchestrated this arrangement, primarily to pressure Melissa, but the financial aspect provided perfect cover. More importantly, the hunter's presence would demonstrate to the neighborhood exactly who controlled the community spaces. As Melissa stormed out, Eleanor felt the familiar comfort of having the upper hand. What she didn't anticipate was how quickly events would spiral beyond her control. That afternoon, while most residents were at work, Emma Carter took Cooper for his usual therapy walk. Their route typically included the quiet trail along the edge of the woods, a peaceful place where Emma could practice the mindfulness exercises her therapist had recommended. The sound of gunshots sent Cooper into protective mode. Breaking free from his leash, he raced toward the woods, barking to scare away the perceived threat to his human. Emma, panicking, ran after him, calling his name. When Cooper didn't return home that evening, the Carters organized a neighborhood search party. The hunting club members, questioned by frantic residents, claimed they hadn't seen any dogs in the area. By nightfall, the Sunny Meadows community had mobilized with flashlights and search grids. Eleanor, watching from her window, felt the first tremors of unease. This wasn't what she'd intended. She'd wanted to assert authority, not cause a crisis. When her doorbell rang at 11 p.m., she opened it to find Raymond Harrington looking distinctly uncomfortable. "We need to talk, Miss Pritchard," he said quietly. "One of my newer members admitted something after everyone started searching. There was an incident with a dog this afternoon." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. "What kind of incident?" Golden Retriever came charging into their hunting blind. Young guy got startled and, well, he fired. Eleanor gripped the doorframe. "Are you telling me they shot someone's dog?" Raymond looked at his boots. He panicked. By the time he realized it wasn't a threat, it was too late. "Where is the animal now?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "They buried it in the woods." Didn't know what else to do. As Raymond left, Eleanor sank onto her sofa, the full weight of what she'd set in motion crushing down on her. She'd wanted control, but not this, never this. Through her window, she could see the flashlight still moving through the darkness, searching for an animal that would never come home. For the first time in many years, Eleanor Pritchard had no plan, no clipboard, no regulation to hide behind. Eleanor Pritchard believed in routines. Every morning at precisely 6:15 a.m., she walked the perimeter of her property, inspecting her neighbor's compliance with HOA regulations. Her clipboard and smartphone camera documented every infraction: a garbage can left out too long, holiday decorations outside the approved calendar window, or the particularly egregious crime of unapproved plant species. The morning after the contentious HOA meeting, Eleanor noticed something that made her blood pressure spike. Melissa Carter's daughter Emma was walking Cooper without the newly mandated HOA pet identification tag. Eleanor marched across the street, her posture military straight. "Excuse me, young lady." Emma, a slender 15-year-old with her mother's dark curls, froze. Cooper, sensing her anxiety, pressed against her legs. "Your dog needs to be wearing the proper identification," Eleanor said, producing a violation notice from her clipboard. "That'll be a $150 fine for the first offense." Emma's hands began trembling, a precursor to the panic attacks that had plagued her since her father's death. Cooper immediately sat at attention, performing his therapy response. "We just got the notice last night," Emma managed, her voice barely audible. "Mom said we have a week to comply." Eleanor's smile was thin. "The grace period is for registration. The requirement for identification was effective immediately. It's all in the documentation." "She's a child, Eleanor," called a voice from behind them. Melissa Carter jogged up the sidewalk in her work clothes, having spotted the confrontation from their front window. "And you know very well that your emergency measure isn't legally enforceable." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Testing me isn't wise, Ms. Carter. This neighborhood maintained a perfect compliance record for 6 years before your arrival." "Mom, can we go?" Emma whispered, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Melissa put an arm around her daughter. "Of course, honey. Take Cooper and go inside." Once Emma was out of earshot, Melissa turned back to Eleanor. "Cooper is a registered therapy animal. He's exempt from local restrictions, including your power play." Eleanor flushed. "The Americans with Disabilities Act doesn't supersede private community regulations." "Actually, it does," Melissa replied. "Perhaps you should consult with the HOA attorney before you continue down this path." As Melissa turned to leave, Eleanor called after her. "Your mother seems to think rules don't apply to special people like you. That's not how the real world works." The comment hit its target. Melissa spun around, her professional composure cracking. "My daughter lost her father. Cooper helps her function. What exactly is your excuse for being cruel?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "I'm protecting property values and community standards. If that makes me the villain in your little drama, so be it." What Eleanor didn't say, what she never said, was that control wasn't just her preference, it was her protection. 20 years earlier, her husband had left without warning, emptying their accounts and disappearing. The humiliation and financial devastation had nearly broken her. She'd rebuilt her life brick by careful brick, vowing never again to be vulnerable to chaos or surprise. By afternoon, the neighborhood was buzzing with news of the confrontation. Walter Jenkins had called an emergency community meeting, bypassing the official HOA channels. Eleanor, seated in her home office, watched through her window as neighbors streamed toward the community center. Her phone remained silent. No invitation had been extended to her. Meanwhile, Thomas Wilson was having coffee with Melissa in her kitchen, reviewing the HOA bylaws. "These emergency powers she's claiming are actually quite limited," he explained. "And there's a recall provision for board members who abuse their authority." "Why are you helping me?" Melissa asked. "You don't even live in the neighborhood." Thomas smiled enigmatically. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in community harmony and a personal distaste for bullies with clipboards." Across the street, Eleanor made a decision. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd saved months ago, but never used. "Mr. Harrington. This is Eleanor Pritchard from Sunny Meadows. You mentioned your hunting club was looking for new grounds. I believe I might have a solution." The wheels were now in motion, carrying them all toward a collision none of them could foresee. The community center had never been so packed. Residents stood along the walls, sat on windowsills, and spilled out into the parking lot. At the front of the room, Melissa Carter stood with her daughter Emma, whose face was swollen from crying. The girl clutched Cooper's blue leash in her hands, twisting it nervously between her fingers. Eleanor sat alone in the front row, acutely aware of the empty seats surrounding her. In the 24 hours since Cooper's body had been discovered in a shallow grave in the woods, the truth had spread through Sunny Meadows like wildfire. Now, the neighborhood's collective grief and anger had one clear target. Thomas Wilson called the impromptu meeting to order. "We're here to address the events that led to the death of Cooper, a registered therapy animal belonging to the Carter family." Eleanor stared straight ahead, her face a carefully composed mask. Inside, however, she was crumbling. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. The image of Emma's therapy dog lying lifeless haunted her every time she closed her eyes. "Miss Pritchard," Thomas continued, "as this meeting was called to address actions taken under your authority as HOA president, you have the floor first." Eleanor rose slowly, turning to face the hostile crowd. For the first time in her life, her carefully rehearsed words abandoned her. She began, then faltered. The room full of neighbors, people whose properties she'd inspected, whose lives she'd regulated with zealous attention to detail, stared back with undisguised contempt. In that moment, something inside Eleanor Pritchard broke. Not just her composure, but the rigid framework that had structured her entire existence since her husband's betrayal. "There's nothing I can say that would justify what happened," she said finally, her voice uncharacteristically small. "I made a terrible decision. I used my position to pursue a personal vendetta. I told myself it was about property values and community standards. But the truth is," she looked directly at Melissa and Emma, "the truth is that I was jealous." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Jealous?" Melissa echoed incredulously. "Of your confidence," Eleanor admitted. "Your ability to stand up to me. Your relationship with your daughter." Her voice caught. "The way your home feels alive and mine just feels perfect." The room fell silent. "I invited the hunters to make a point, to show everyone that I was still in control. I never imagined." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt, especially not Cooper. I know that doesn't change what happened, and I know that sorry is insufficient. But I am sorry, more than I can express." Walter Jenkins stood up. "Eleanor, you violated the bylaws, exceeded your authority, and created a dangerous situation that resulted in the death of an animal that was medically necessary for a child in our community. Sorry doesn't begin to cover it." "I know," Eleanor whispered, "which is why I've already contacted the HOA attorney. I've resigned as president, effective immediately. And she took a deep breath, "I've authorized the release of emergency funds to cover the cost of a new therapy dog for Emma, though I understand no animal can replace Cooper." Emma, who had been silent throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke. "You can't replace him. He saved my life after Dad died. He was the only one who could calm me down during panic attacks." Her voice trembled, but grew stronger. "But Cooper would have forgiven you. That's what dogs do." Eleanor felt the tears she'd been fighting finally spill over. This teenage girl, devastated by her actions, was showing more emotional maturity than she had managed in 20 years. Thomas Wilson stepped forward. "I think we all need time to process this tragedy. In the meantime, I'm proposing an immediate vote to dissolve the current HOA board and elect interim representatives until formal elections can be held." As the meeting continued around her, Eleanor slipped out the side door. The neighborhood she had fought so hard to control suddenly felt foreign to her. She had built her life's second act on the foundation of rules and regulations, believing they would protect her from the pain of her past. Instead, they had isolated her, turned her into someone she barely recognized. As she walked home alone, Eleanor wondered if it was too late to become someone different, someone better. The moment Eleanor Pritchard's designer heels sank into the fresh dog excrement on her immaculate lawn, the entire Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association meeting fell silent. The former bank executive, current HOA president, and neighborhood terror, known behind her back as Karen, let out a shriek that could have shattered the community center's windows. Her perfectly highlighted bob haircut seemed to bristle with rage as she scraped her shoe against the manicured grass. "This is exactly what I'm talking about." Eleanor's voice climbed several octaves as she jabbed a manicured finger toward Melissa Carter, a single mother who had recently moved into the cul-de-sac with her teenage daughter and their golden retriever. Animals running wild. Property values plummeting. Chaos. The fact that her shoe mishap had occurred just minutes before she was set to present her proposal for banning pets from the community seemed almost scripted, a coincidence Eleanor fully intended to exploit. Madam President, Walter Jenkins, the retired history professor from Oak Lane, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should confirm whose dog was responsible before jumping to." "It doesn't matter whose specific animal did this," Eleanor cut him off, her voice dripping with contempt. "The point is, pets are a nuisance. Period." The 20 homeowners gathered in the sterile community center shifted uncomfortably in their metal folding chairs. Eleanor had been building toward this moment for months, gradually tightening HOA regulations, with increasingly punitive fines for everything from unauthorized garden gnomes to mailboxes painted the wrong shade of beige. Eleanor clicked to the first slide of her PowerPoint presentation, revealing a dramatically downward-sloping graph. Studies show that neighborhoods with unrestricted pet access see an average 12% decrease in property values. "That's completely fabricated," Melissa whispered to Walter, who nodded subtly. "Excuse me." Eleanor's eyes locked onto Melissa like heat-seeking missiles. "Do you have something to add, Ms. Carter?" Melissa, still new to the neighborhood's politics, but already familiar with Eleanor's reputation, rose to her feet. At 38, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had weathered difficult storms. Her daughter Emma's therapy dog, Cooper, had been instrumental in helping the teen cope with anxiety after her father's death 3 years earlier. Yes, actually, that statistic is false. Multiple studies show that pet-friendly neighborhoods often have higher property values because they attract stable, family-oriented buyers. Eleanor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I wasn't aware we had a real estate expert in our midst, especially one who's been in the neighborhood for all of, what is it now, 3 months?" "I'm an environmental lawyer," Melissa replied evenly. "Research is what I do." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, then you should be familiar with our bylaws, which clearly state that the HOA board can implement emergency measures when community standards are threatened." Walter Jenkins stood up. "Eleanor, you can't possibly be suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything," Eleanor interrupted, triumphantly holding up a document. "The board already voted this morning. Effective immediately, all pets must be registered with the HOA, and a new fee structure will be implemented." Gasps rippled through the room. "You can't do that," Melissa protested. "The bylaws require community input for new regulations." Eleanor's smile widened. "Emergency powers, dear. Section 12, paragraph 3. You might want to review your documents more carefully." As the meeting dissolved into angry murmurs, Eleanor felt a familiar rush of satisfaction. Order through control. It had been her mantra since childhood. What the Sunny Meadows residents didn't understand was that Eleanor was protecting them from themselves, from the chaos that inevitably followed when rules weren't strictly enforced. What Eleanor didn't notice was Thomas Wilson, the silent owner of Wilson Properties, watching from the back row. He had recently purchased the adjacent land and held more influence over the neighborhood's future than anyone realized. As Eleanor continued her tirade, Thomas made a note in his phone. "Call Melissa Carter tomorrow." The confrontation had begun, but neither Eleanor nor Melissa could have predicted just how devastating the consequences would be. 6 months after Cooper's death, Eleanor Pritchard's front yard looked nothing like it used to. The geometrically perfect lawn had been partially replaced with native wildflowers. A small vegetable garden occupied one corner. Most surprisingly, a little free library, painted in cheerful colors, stood near the sidewalk with a small memorial plaque, "In memory of Cooper, who taught us compassion." Inside her home, the changes were equally dramatic. The formal living room now housed art supplies and half-finished projects. The dining room table was covered with paperwork, not HOA violations, but grant applications for the Sunny Meadows Community Center youth programs. Eleanor was rinsing paintbrushes in her kitchen sink when the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find Emma Carter standing on her porch, accompanied by a young German Shepherd mix wearing a therapy dog vest. "Emma," Eleanor said, genuinely surprised. Despite her efforts at community reconciliation, the Carters had understandably kept their distance. "And who's this?" "This is Phoenix," Emma said, her hand resting on the dog's head. "We adopted him from the shelter last month. He's almost finished with his therapy training." Eleanor nodded, unsure what to say. "He's beautiful." An awkward silence stretched between them until Emma spoke again. "Mr. Jenkins said you're the one who's been organizing the fundraiser for the community center's teen mental health program." "Walter exaggerates my role," Eleanor demurred. "I'm just helping with the paperwork." Emma seemed to gather her courage. "Mom doesn't know I'm here. But I want to help with the fundraiser. I could share Cooper's story. How he helped me after Dad died." Eleanor stared at the girl, astonished. "Emma, that's incredibly generous. But are you sure? After what I caused?" "Phoenix is helping me learn about moving forward," Emma said, sounding older than her 15 years. "And I think Cooper's story could help other kids who are struggling." Inside Eleanor's chest, something that had been tightly knotted for months, for years really, loosened slightly. "Would you like to come in?" she asked hesitantly. "I just made lemonade." As they sat in Eleanor's kitchen, the conversation gradually became less strained. Emma showed Eleanor how Phoenix responded to anxiety cues. Eleanor showed Emma the community center plans, including a proposed memorial garden. "Why did you change?" Emma asked suddenly. "Mom says people like you never do." Eleanor considered the question carefully. When you lose something important, like you lost your dad, and then Cooper, you have choices about how to respond. She traced a pattern on the tabletop. 20 years ago, my husband left me suddenly. Emptied our accounts. I had to rebuild from nothing." Emma's eyes widened in surprise. "I chose control as my protection," Eleanor continued. "Rules, regulations, perfect order, they became my shield against ever being vulnerable again. But in protecting myself, I became the very thing that hurt others." She looked directly at Emma. "Sometimes it takes causing terrible pain to realize you've become the source of what hurt you in the first place." Phoenix nudged his head under Emma's hand, sensing the emotional weight of the conversation. "I'm still trying to figure out who I am without my clipboard and rulebook," Eleanor admitted. "It's scary, but it feels more real." When Melissa Carter drove down Maple Avenue 30 minutes later, frantically searching for her daughter whose phone had died, she was stunned to find Emma sitting cross-legged on Eleanor Pritchard's front lawn, teaching the former HOA president how to play fetch with Phoenix. Melissa pulled into Eleanor's driveway and approached cautiously. "Emma, your phone's dead. I've been worried." "Sorry, Mom," Emma said. "I was telling Ms. Pritchard about the fundraiser idea." Eleanor stood awkwardly. "It was my fault. We lost track of time." Melissa studied the woman who had caused her family so much pain. The perfectly coiffed hair was now pulled back in a simple ponytail. The designer clothes replaced with jeans and a paint-splattered shirt. But it was the absence of rigid defensiveness in her posture that was most striking. "The memorial garden is a good idea," Melissa said finally. "Emma showed me the plans." Eleanor nodded cautiously. "I was thinking of asking Thomas Wilson to donate the land where it happened. Turn it into something healing." "He already agreed," Emma interjected. "He's waiting for you two to work together on the design." Both women turned to stare at her. Emma shrugged, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Phoenix and I have been busy." As they stood there, the grieving mother, the teenager learning resilience, and the former Karen finding her humanity, Phoenix circled them playfully, his leash creating a temporary bond that connected them all. None of them noticed Thomas Wilson watching from his car across the street, a satisfied smile on his face. His phone buzzed with a text. "Is the plan still in motion?" He typed back a single word, "Proceeding." The tragedy that had torn apart Sunny Meadows was slowly knitting it back together in unexpected ways. But Thomas Wilson's mysterious interest in their community suggested that Eleanor Pritchard's journey from HOA tyrant to community healer might soon face an entirely new challenge. For now, though, as the three of them walked together toward the site of the future memorial garden, something that felt remarkably like hope floated in the air between them.